Good morning. My name is Tyson Evans. I'm an editor at the New York Times on the Interactive News Desk and have the pleasure of moderating the session this morning about designing personalized tablet news. We've got three great speakers. The format, we're going to have them do some quick run-throughs of their apps and their backstories, and then we'll do, I've got some questions for them that I'd be curious to hear their answers to, and then we'll open it up to the audience after that. So the three speakers we have today are Joey Marburger. He's the mobile design director at the Washington Post. Mark Johnson, who's the CEO of Zeit, and Bobby Ghoshal, who's the designer, entrepreneur, and founder of Flood. So we'll start off with Joey.
Hello, everybody. As Tyson said, I'm the mobile design director at the Washington Post, but I also worked on an app called Trove, which is from WAPO Labs, which is the digital incubation hub of the Washington Post company. But my main gig is really in the Washington Post newsroom, working on news apps and things like that. Now with Trove, I think I was kind of labeled as the designer for it, but I really wasn't. I did a lot of the initial kind of UX, UI discovery phases, goals and concepts of the app. And then because we were launching on multiple platforms at the same time, it was actually designed at the very end kind of collaboratively. Load it up here. Basically with Trove, really it's to highlight the technology behind it. We essentially have a giant API that has more than 30,000 sources that can provide content based on a channel. And the channel can be about anything, a single word, a person, a place, something you like, whatever. And what the algorithm does in the API is provides relevant content to that channel. Not just based on like a query string or a search or like you're not essentially Googling something. It's trying to find relevant content and give you articles from all the stories. So you can see here I've got a few channels up top. The green row is editors' picks. We actually have full-time editors that work for Trove that curate custom content and try to pick some of the top things going on that day. So you can see some big news today. One of the Al-Qaeda people thing. There we go. So you can see that this story is from the Christian Science Monitor, so it is not Washington Post company content. So you see it basically as you would in a normal Safari browser window. But if it is Washington Post company content or one of our wire services or providers, and we have access to the content, then you get a more kind of streamlined Instapaper style view. And you can refresh your channels, add a lot of different things, and you can have quick access to your different topics. Then we also kind of have like an either-or thing, which is also on the website, which is trove.com. And you are essentially presented with two stories from two kind of very different channels, and you can pick one or the other, what interests you, and then Trove will try to surface content that's related to what you've chosen. Right. We'll back up a little bit. I'll show you kind of where we started with Trove, which doesn't really look anything like it does now. Let's see here. Right, this is a quick screenshot of Trove.com that you can go to and interact with it if you don't want to, actually view it on a tablet. It's also on iPhone, Android, BlackBerry. It's more of the website. But you can see kind of how a lot of the design cues from the website made it into the app and vice versa. But I'm going to swipe through what we've already seen here. This is like phase one, early concept, put everything on a page and get really messy. I think this was one of the first comps that we kind of designed by committee. So you can start seeing like that we were going with this swipeable road approach. We still didn't have a logo or color or any branding really. But this is kind of where we started. And then we were like, well, let's start playing around with the UX, the type of layout we want to do. So we were like, do we want it to be more of a list pagination approach, kind of like Twitter for iPad style? So we experimented with that first. Then we were like, maybe we can kind of do the row thing, but more in a grid layout, is we basically started taking similar grids and layouts from other apps and just kind of playing around with Trove content. And we got into kind of a stacks idea, like it's stackable content by channel, an ability to add things quickly, edit them, really pared down. This is one thing that we essentially abandoned at the end, is trying to like tune channels. Because the big thing with personalized tablet design is either you have to provide what users want, or you have to provide a way for them to create it. So like adding or tuning a channel has to be a big thing. Otherwise, if you have to really work for it, users aren't going to do it, they're not going to add it, and they're going to leave your app. Then we looked at kind of a more experimental article view, kind of split style. And you can kind of see this is what is somewhat in the app now, but just a little different. But this was kind of phase one. I think the screen was created probably like 8 months ago. And we just try to throw things out there first and figure out how users would interact with it. And either we'll build like a really scaled down prototype, or we'll just have this flat image and we'll give it to people and see what they do with it. But that's about it.
I'm going to switch iPads here. See if this works. So I'm Mark Johnson. I'm the CEO of Zeit. Let's see if that works. Voila. Excellent. So Zeit is another personalized iPad magazine. I think what's unique about Zeit is that we look at millions of pieces of content a day. So there we go. We search the entire web, essentially looking at social signals, and try to deliver from those millions of pieces of content, hundreds or dozens of pieces of content that are really interesting to you. And there's lots of technology that's happening in the back end to make this happen. But from a user perspective, our goal is to figure out very, very quickly kind of the things that matter to you, and deliver you a personalized magazine, a personalized experience very quickly. So the way we do that is we look at things like Twitter. So I'll put in my Twitter handle here. We can look at things like read it later. And what we're doing here is we're just looking at a representative set of documents. So we're not actually mirroring my Twitter feed. So if you look at my Twitter feed, I follow hundreds of people, and they share documents every day. I share documents every day on Twitter. And what we say is that's a really interesting set of documents that we can use to try to predict additional documents that you might like. Okay. So basically what we're doing here is we're looking at all those documents in my read it later, looking at all those documents in my Twitter. Oops. I guess I used the wrong read it later password, but it shouldn't matter. So this is what a first-time user would get. So as you can see here on the side, we've automatically picked a bunch of sections for me based on my Twitter feed. So I like things like politics, social media. I used to work for Microsoft and Bing, so that's right. I worked for a bunch of search engines, and I typically read a lot of search stuff. Now, that's sort of an initial pop that users get. So it's really interesting to them when they're playing with Zeit for the first time, and they see, oh wow, just based on my Twitter stream, you figured out a lot of interesting categories for me. Now that being said, you can add a lot of other stuff. So we have these top categories here. For example, some of you in this room know that I particularly like wine and mixology. And then you can search for lots of tail topics too. So because we look at millions and millions of articles a day, we're not limited to hundreds, dozens of streams of information. We have over about 10,000 different channels that you could choose from. So for example, I also like taxidermy. So I can add that. I'm also from San Francisco. There we go. So users, as they use the application, continually add more categories. This is actually something we found very interesting, is we thought that an average user would have on the order of 6 or 7 categories. Turns out that the average user adds 13 categories to Zeit. Now, as you go through Zeit, everybody's Zeit is different. So this is personalized to me, and will get smarter as I use it. So for example, as I click on one of these articles, so for the article view, we render it in sort of what we call reader mode. This means that we've optimized it for the tablet, so it loads a lot faster. It strips out some of the extraneous information on the page, and sort of gives the user a better reading mode. Now, on the right here, you see there's a personalization tab, and that's part of how we figure out what the user likes and doesn't like. So I can give Zeit a lot more information about the kinds of things I like to read. I can say, I like this article, and we'll sort of, as you like and dislike articles, try to figure out what aspects of the article you like. And when we look at what you like in the article, it's not limited to just the subject of the article. It could be the style it's written. So we look at all sorts of things like, is it satire, is it a long piece, is it a short piece, where it comes from, who wrote it. All of these things are really critical in figuring out the types of things that people like to read. I think one of the fears that people often have about personalized news services is, are they going to box you into some sort of room where you only see the news that you like? It turns out that you can generate a lot of serendipity by looking not just at subjects, but types of articles you like. So we actually see a lot of usage from users on this thumbing up and thumbing down. That's it. I feel like if you have an iPad, I highly recommend that you try Zeit. It's one of those experiences where, since it's personalized to you, since every Zeit is different, you really only get the pop if you try it yourself. So if you have an iPad or you can grab one from someone, I highly recommend trying it. So I look forward to answering questions later. Bobby, do you want this one?
Whichever one my app is on, really.
There you go.
Thanks, man. Hi, my name's Bobby. I'm the founder of Flood, and I'll open up the app here. A little bit of background. Flood is about a year old. It was founded by myself and my partner, Matthew Ausonio, my business partner, Matthew Ausonio, last year. And we got funded in April to build out our vision and what our vision of news is. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to show everything today, but a lot of the exciting stuff launches next month. But what our vision for news is to convert users into influencers, and also to make news more active and more ubiquitous. The application that I'm going to show you today is the one that's in the App Store. The application that launches next month is very different to what I'm going to show you today, but both are really nice. So when you open up Flood for the first time, we didn't go through the setup process here, but there's a 3-step process. The first thing you do in Flood is you select the sources that you like. So Zeit is really good at figuring out what you like as you use it. What we believe is a lot of people already like sources that they like to go to every single day. And that's when you use Flood, is when you know you're the kind of person who likes to read the New York Times or the New Yorker or TechCrunch or Mashable. So you open up the application for the first time, you pick those curated sources, and you log into your Facebook and Twitter. So if you scroll up here, you've got your Facebook and Twitter logins, which pulls in a timeline of news that your friends share on both social networks. And the application automatically generates a really nice, pretty, picturesque wall, if you will, of all the articles in chronological order of when they were put onto the internet. For the most part, the application runs on RSS feed technology, but of course we plug in Facebook and Twitter as well, so it's not secluded to that. The top stream here is called the Flood stream. All right, the Flood stream is our way for users to step outside of the norm of everything that they like to read every single day and look at what other flooders, which is what we call our users, flooders, what other flooders are bookmarking or sharing on Facebook, Twitter, Read It Later, Instapaper, et cetera. So we've got this one stream that's a social stream, and it's constantly curated with stuff I don't personally like to read, but I love to just stumble upon and look at, right? It's got a lot of creative content. It's got a lot of science content, content that I don't personally follow. I'm more of a tech user myself, so I follow TechCrunch, Mashable, and the whole lot. You scroll down to the bottom, and you've got all the sources that you like to follow. So personally, I like Adweek, Talking Points Memo, Anthology, Cool Hunting, Tree Hugger, et cetera, et cetera. And you can see as you scroll, it loads in this really nice timeline of all the stories from each source. So you click on a story. So let's go down to Adweek. Click on a story, and it gives you some tips. So the tip it's telling me here is if you like a story, touch the heart, you could love the article, right? And you could share it with a bunch of people. So we've got this viewing pane here that loads the entire story in. I touch the heart, and I can do a few things. When you touch the heart, you can bookmark. You can add the story to Instapaper, so you can access it outside of Flood. You can send the article to someone via an email, or you can tweet it, Facebook it, et cetera, et cetera. So I'll go ahead and bookmark it. Why not? The app, of course, works in both modes. No? Nope.
It's locked.
Oh. There we go. So it changes the viewing pane a little bit. So you still have controls to go to all the other articles without leaving your viewing pane. I think that's pretty interesting. So I'm going to skip an anthology and scroll in. Oh. Sorry. No, there we go. It works. So this is what the view looks like in portrait. Right? The heart up here takes me to my bookmarks. So I bookmarked a story earlier. Let's see if it's saved. It's saved. Great. Go back to my bookmarks. Fantastic. Quick overview of your settings. So you can, every single week, we pick 6 sources that we really, really like, and we feature them. This week's 6 are Adweek, Talking Points, Tree Hugger, the stuff that we looked at earlier. You could dive into different categories. So we've got business. We curate certain feeds that we like in business, creative, technology, lifestyle, etc. So we pre-curate things for you if you don't know what you like to read or if you want to discover new sources. And then you could do interesting things like moving your feeds around. So I want to move Anthology Magazine to the top, and I want to delete Cool Hunting. Oh, that changes category. Right? It's really simple to use. So that's the gist. When you open up Flood for the first time, you select sources that you like, you go into categories and you look at the stuff we curate. We partner with lots of premium partners, and we take all this content, put it into this really nice, beautiful mosaic, and it just makes for a really nice, elegant reading experience. And you can download it on iPhone or on the iPad, and if you have an Android device, we just launched on Android as well. So, yeah, thank you.
So I'm going to start off with a couple of my own questions, and then we'll throw it to the audience after that. One of my curiosities is all these apps and kind of the double-edged sword of personalization is that kind of opening screen experience when someone first downloads it. And how do you balance, the empty screen with connect and pick feeds versus showing them content on screen one, or kind of how much is too much to ask a user to do on the first screen? Whoever wants it.
I mean, we found that users are willing to do a surprising amount of setup. We try to minimize it, but it seems like they're willing to do a lot. One of the things that we had a belief in is that it's really about the content you're getting. So when the user adds some streams of information, technology, sports, politics, what have you, even an unpersonalized experience should be really good. So the quality of articles should be really, really high in any of those. And that will encourage the user to use the application more. That being said, like you really have to minimize the amount of hoops they have to jump through. Like that's why when you saw me on my Twitter, it automatically selected categories, even though there were other categories I probably would have wanted to add. We actually skipped that step entirely just because we felt that taking the user directly into the application is gonna force them, or is gonna encourage them to come back in the future. So I think that's really a balancing act between sort of setting it up for them as automatically as possible and, giving them controls, but not so much rope that they hang themselves.
With Trove, it was, we didn't really want to do like the traditional kind of setup screen. We just ask you to connect with Facebook or create an account. And it can suggest some channels from Facebook, but really the tool we wanted to use was try to find a fun way to do the setup, which is we just kind of called versus, which is that, either or kind of hot or not kind of style. That basically it's two stories, but they're two different channels that are pretty different for the most part, and you kind of pick one or the other. And that's to start showing you how to add channels and also what you're going to get from the channel. And then we also have the editor's picks channel that is always there, which is a range of the top stories of the day against their channel, so a user can quickly add it. So we kind of make the app like more or less you're setting it up all the time. So you can add as you go and as you find new stuff. But we want you to see the content first, not the channel first, so that you would be more interested to add the actual channel.
Yeah, sure. And also curious, if you tinker with different thresholds have you guys reconfigured what that startup screen looks like?
We have, but we haven't launched it, right? So the first time we actually launched a startup sort of setup screen was back in April. And I guess we tweaked it a little bit. What we found is if you take the time to download an application, especially a news application, the idea of a news application is to get the kind of news that interests you, and that involves a little bit of work. What we don't want is for users to have to search for news, right? So which is why we take the time and the effort to go out and partner with a lot of content providers, and we put them front and center, especially the really, really good ones. And for the most part, I think there's maybe, for the average user probably has 5 to 7 sources that they can name when you ask them, hey, what do you like to read every single day? Or what do you like to read every single week? So those are the ones that we want to put front and center and make it really easy to find. And then we have the serendipitous sort of, stumbling, where you've got your flood feed at the top, and you can look at what all the other users are finding and reading, and find news that way. Or you can look at our weekly best. But for the most part, I think users know what kind of sources they like. I know that I like technology news and flood. I just touched the technology category, and I have an iPad, so it probably means I like to touch screens, and I will touch a few sources just to get a little bit more out of the application. So, yeah.
Cool. Second, I'm kind of curious, everyone's app has kind of been out in the wild for, at least between 6 months and a year, I think. So what have you been surprised by? What expectations did you have going into this app, either from the design perspective or the consumption perspective, that users really defied what you thought would happen?
One thing that really surprised us with Trove is because we launched on so many platforms at the same time, we didn't know if people would use multiple platforms with the same account, or if they would have a single point of entry. And we thought that maybe people would find the website and then also use it on iPad and iPhone, or vice versa. But what we're really finding is it is very kind of single point of entry. Some people, they just only use it on the iPhone. Some people only on the iPad. There's some people that don't even know there's a website. I mean, it's really, really bizarre that, at this late stage of tablets being out there, is that you can still really be surprised at what people will do. And you can't predict it totally. And I mean, because we have a lot of single access points, that's good. But I think one thing we learned from it is that they don't all have to be so similar. Even though, we want to have the branding and everything like that, is that we are going to kind of gear it more towards the specific device that it's on.
So what do you think are the kind of key ingredients that need to be across all those different platforms versus the ones that are maybe too superfluous?
Well, I think the big tool for us is that kind of versus thing, which is really the setup. But we tried to take the same experience and put it across all the apps. Like what you see at the top of the website is very similar to what you get when you tap the button on the iPad, but that experience is not as good on the tablet because you don't get as much of it. But on the website, you click back and forth, and it's a little different. I I think that is one big thing that we're really trying to look at to pair specifically to the device.
There are three things I think that were really interesting after we launched. One is the time that people use the application. So our heaviest usage day is on Sunday, and heaviest usage happens in the evenings, which is exactly opposite what a typical, for example, Amazon.com sees, right? They see typical usage during the weekdays. Biggest day is probably a Wednesday, and during the day is when they get their most usage. So I imagine people plopping back on their couch at night reading Zeit. Another interesting thing is people's willingness to give us feedback. So obviously we can take implicit feedback from you. So if you click on an article, that gives us some sort of signal that at least the headline was interesting to you. How much time you spent on the article is interesting. But much more interesting to us is if you give it an explicit thumbs up or thumbs down. It turns out that every single one of our cohorts that comes in starts off by thumbing up or thumbing down about 25% of articles. And then that drops to about 12% of articles after a few weeks, but still that's a pretty high number that we didn't expect. And then the third thing that I thought was really interesting after we launched is that a little over 10% of our articles are saved or shared. So there's a lot of social action that happens with articles that we hadn't expected. I mean, something like among that, email is by far the largest, but lots of people are using things like Instapaper and Read It Later. Those are the second two most used functions there. So that was really surprising to see people interacting so much with the articles.
I think for us, the application was built to be immersive at first, and then we realized that we're really fortunate. We have a lot of people that love to use our app every day, and they actually take photos. So there's a bunch of people that take photos on is that? What is that sound? Oh, okay. I thought something's happening at the table. What is going on? Yeah, so people take photos of using Flood on their iPhone on buses and at Starbucks, and I think that's really cool. And that told us something. That told us that Flood is not the kind of application you would use in bed. I just don't think it is. I think it's set up for two things: speed and relevance. And that's exactly what we're designing for in this next version. So a lot of it comes down to setting up streams that users can quickly get in and out of. Outside of that, morning times for us are really busy. The most surprising thing probably is that 48% of our users are in Europe, and a lot of the news that comes in through Flood is not in English. So I think that's pretty interesting. Yeah.
Cool. In addition to the kind of complexity balance in the opening screen, I'm also curious about how you guys think through all the various kind of touch points of explicit feedback, sharing, altering the experience and personalization kind of after you've gotten over the first hump. Like how you decide how many sharing services are too many, or how many different ways to bookmark or read later, or is it kind of the more the merrier, or do you really try to think through how to triage those down to the right ones, and what ones have you added or removed kind of since launching?
I mean, I would say the more the merrier. People all have different services they use. So for example, we added Instapaper first, then we added Read It Later, LinkedIn, and something else next. But what's interesting is they didn't poach from other services. So when we added, it was just, the pie got bigger. So when we added Read It Later, we didn't poach a bunch of Instapaper users over to Read It Later. It turns out that the pie just got a lot bigger, and suddenly lots of people were saving with Read It Later. So I think that the challenge is to give your users as many options as they want, but keeping the interface really simple. The way we did that is to just show users the past 4 services they used. So for example, I never use Instapaper, I always use Read It Later. So I never see Instapaper on my screen because I often save things to Read It Later. So there's just a balance there about making sure that users see only the services that they use.
Yeah, well, with any really good design, when you start off, you kind of have to have a singular goal. And with Trove, we just want people to add channels. That was kind of like the first major user action. So sharing kind of got pushed to the side at first because we're like, that's kind of a pretty standard thing that everyone kind of does. But when we got there, we realized that, that's got to be a little bit more important up top, which it really is now. And we just decided to kind of go with the big three at the top. It was basically email, Twitter, and Facebook. But we want to add more things, but it's just as Mark's saying, it's like the more you add, the more difficult it becomes. But luckily with iOS 5 coming out and integration of services and things like that, it's going to become a lot more native and easier to add things.
So when we started with email, Twitter, and Facebook, as everyone should. And email is by far the most used, and actually that was very surprising. Email is by far the most used sharing service on Flood. But then we also launched with bookmarking, and bookmarking in Flood is anonymous, but it's also an interesting way to share content. So we added bookmarking, Instapaper, read it later, all a few months ago. And what we found was we could do something really interesting. Not only can you use that as a mechanism to share content, but we have our own version of Clout. I don't know if you guys know what Clout is, but it sort of ranks you. Well, it doesn't rank you, but it gives you a social ranking, right, based on how much you interact with people on social networks. So we have our own version of Clout, and we have our own tiers of ranking of content, and we rank content interestingly based on how many times it gets shared on Facebook, Twitter, email, etc., but also how many times it gets bookmarked, excuse me. And then what happens to that bookmark once it shows up in the Flood feed? Do many people click on it? Do many people touch it? Well, you give it a better ranking then. So yeah, we ramped up our sharing over the last few months, but we take that sharing data and we serve up interesting content based on it too. So I think there's space to do something interesting with it.
I'm also curious about the balance of social in these apps. You're relying on these kind of the social graph to shape the feeds, right? But you don't really see your friends' names, your friends' faces, specific recommendations from friends necessarily. I don't think any of the apps do that right now. I'm curious what you think. Is the graph just there to kind of be used as a kind of intelligence source in customizing this app, or do you think more explicit kind of social layers of seeing your friends and being able to connect with them in different ways is something that's important for this personalization experience? Is it better to just kind of have it in the background?
It's a really tough question. I mean, I think that news is inherently social. I think that that's why email is so commonly used as you email a friend when you see an article that's really cool. We think about social a lot, and we would love to integrate it a bit more. For example, when my mother emails me an article, wouldn't it be cool that if instead of just emailing it to me, it could actually show up somewhere in my site? So I see that an article is recommended by my mother. That being said, that's it's figuring out with whom you share it, how you share it, and what context you share it. We've left that largely up to the user right now. It's not within the application simply because it's such a difficult problem. And I think that if you get it wrong, you end up making the application a lot harder. So when we do it, we would like to do it right. But it's something that is on our minds almost every day, thinking about how to have a tightly integrated social experience.
Yeah, we didn't want to go with the traditional kind of flipboard style or just like straight stream of social content. The big thing Trove does up front is if you connect with Facebook, it uses your likes and interests and things from Facebook to suggest channels for you. But that's about as far as it goes. It's not going to, you're not going to see like your Facebook wall inside the app. The technology does take some cues from social, like if it's a like from Facebook and one of your friends also likes another article, it can help kind of push that to the front a little bit. But you don't see that as much. Like you don't see that at Tyson was like, really reading that article. It's just pushed to the front.
So how many of you guys saw Facebook's conference last week or a week and a half ago? It's quite a lot, yeah? So Zuck dropped a pretty big bomb on everyone, with Newsstream. I mean, I think that's really interesting technology. And actually, at Flood, we think that is a big part of what the future of news will be. We have a term internally that we use, which is currently news is share by sharing, and it's cumbersome. It takes too much time. You have to tweet something, you have to Facebook something, you have to like something, you have to Instapaper something, and it's annoying. And it doesn't really tell you a whole lot about yourself in the long term, and certainly doesn't tell your friends a whole lot about yourself in the long term. So for the last few months, we too have been working on our version of not share by sharing, but share by using. And we've got some really interesting controls in place that help with your privacy. So none of that's visible in this app, by the way. So it's a little bit hard for me to pitch this app. But next month, we're launching Flood 2.0. And a lot of that, the version of the idea of sharing changes. And I think it tells a much better story about the person. And I would like to put a caveat to that. It's not all about share by sharing and everything's open to the public and everyone always knows what you read. I think that's really scary. But we take the idea of not just your real identity, but pseudonymity, and we add share by using, and we merge it together. And I think that makes for a really potent and powerful recipe for how news can be shared across networks and how it could tell a story about you as a person. So, yeah.
So I'd like to open it up to the audience. What kind of questions do you guys have for these three panelists and the apps that they're here representing? Yeah.
Bobby spoke about partnering with content providers. I'd like to hear from Mark and Joey about that as well. Is that how you do is like partner with all content providers? Or is it
Okay, well, the main thing we do in Trove is we don't really partner with content providers. We already have an established network of content providers because Washington Post Company, including Washington Post, Slate, bevy of other products. Also, we work with the news services we already have as a company. And that's why I was showing if we load other people's content that you get their experience because we're not partnering with them in any way. It is something that we are open to in certain areas. Like if someone did want to partner with us, we would. We do partner on some photo pieces, but not with like anybody distinctive.
Yeah, so we have two modes for content. One is reading mode, which I showed you, and then some content is shown in web mode. There are definitely publishers that have come to us with concerns about reading mode. That concern is mainly that we've optimized it for the iPad, created a great experience, and in doing so have stripped out a lot of the other information on the page, which includes ads. So right now we're in conversations with a lot of different publishers to figure out a way that, let's face it, web pages are not optimized for tablet use. They just, they don't look as good on a tablet as they do on a big screen. Most publishers realize that the reading experience that we provide, that others provide, is much better. So we're working with publishers right now to figure out a way that we can continue to create a great user experience within Zeit, but monetize the content. So we'll have some announcements eventually about that.
Other questions?
can I pop on one?
Yeah, please, go ahead.
Could you tell us something about the revenue streams from this? I mean, is there any revenue possibility?
I believe we're all free apps, right? That being said, I think that there's huge opportunity, at least I see within Zeit. I mean, we don't just know demographics about people. I'm not a male living in San Francisco. I'm actually a person who likes wine and mixology and San Francisco and logic and algorithms, right? I mean, I have a wide set of interests. I think what that will eventually mean for advertisers is really interesting hyper-targeting. To the point where I think that the users themselves won't even really see the advertising as advertising. They'll see it as some sort of value to themselves. That being said, that we haven't put any advertising in the product yet for a few reasons. I think one of them is that our brand promise to users is that we deliver you highly personalized information that's relevant to you. If we suddenly start showing you ads that aren't relevant, I think that that dilutes our brand. So we want to approach it very carefully. But I think that eventually there should be some really, really, really interesting ad opportunities within any of these products because we know so much about the personal taste and interests of the users.
So advertising is probably the most obvious way to make money, and that's definitely something we're looking into, but it cannot contaminate the content, and I think that's really important. we also see a bigger opportunity, actually, not just in ads, but in mobile commerce. You figure news on tablets and iPhones and Android devices are all mobile. They've got location tagged to it. And I think you can do a lot of interesting things with the interests of people and based on where they are, serve them up, for example, coupons, right? Why not? People do it in the Sunday newspaper. It's a really big business. It's a multi-billion-dollar business. So why can you not do that on a mobile device many times over every single day, as long as it doesn't contaminate the content? That is the most important thing, because content is king. Users download applications like Flood, Zeit, and Trove because they want the best possible way to read news. And as soon as you start littering it with ads, it starts to become a really big problem. I think a lot of websites have that problem today. I think they've been configured to the standards of a decade ago, and I think everything changes now with tablet design, which I would also like to preface, or also like to add, that we're not going to leave until we at least hear 2 more questions, because tablet design is probably one of the most important problems of the next year to year and a half in news. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff going on right now that we can probably help you guys with. So throw some questions out there. Oh, we've got a question there. All right.
As more news sources go behind paywalls, how will you integrate being able to go behind paywalls that your users have logins for, such as like the New York Times, or if you want advanced wire not?
It's a really good question. Frankly, I don't see it as a huge trend with a lot of people going behind paywalls, and I would caution a lot of organizations going behind paywalls. The most consistent feedback we hear from Zeit is, wow, I find stuff on Zeit I couldn't have found elsewhere. What that says to me is that people, and I think this is where we differ a little bit philosophically, is that I don't think people are just looking at sources anymore. There's so much content being created every day. On an average day, we have well over 100,000 sources that we look at for Zeit. And I think that there's possibly a challenge of integrating that content behind the paywall, but there's another path that may happen, and that could be that that content that goes behind a paywall is just never seen in Zeit. And what I would worry about more is that it's never seen in Zeit and that users don't care. And I think that that's a really big challenge for news organizations right now. And that's why we're working so closely with publishers to figure out how to monetize their content, because I'm not sure that that adding a lot of subscriptions within Zeit would enhance the user experience.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly kind of our thinking with it, is that one of the big things with the design that's played down is the source, and really it's just the content itself and the channel. The source is very even past tertiary. I think that people, if something is behind a paywall, then that's where they're going to access it. I don't think they're going to access it anywhere else. And I mean, to spend a lot of money to create a paywall and then have to come back around and have some sort of secure API interaction to be able to allow open source people to integrate it in their apps, I mean, it becomes a lose-lose, really. So I think that, content wants to be free, it wants to be open, and if it's siloed off somewhere else, then that's the place that you're going to view it.
Yeah, go ahead.
How does text content rate against video content or other interactive content among popular?
For Flood specifically, because the tiles of text content look less impressive than tiles with video or photo content, it's dramatic. I mean, people follow sources in Flood that don't serve up images in their RSS feeds, which I think is kind of ridiculous. I think you should be serving images at all times if you have images with your content. But people spend a whole lot more time on feeds that have images and video, and it's a beautiful. I mean, you paid a lot of money for your iPad. You took the effort to download a bunch of news applications. You want to look at media. You don't just want to look at text. If you wanted text, you'd get a Kindle. Well, not with the Kindle Fire now, but at least the Kindle, right? So I think the experience is dramatically different, and users spend a whole lot more time. And I don't have data on that right now, like up to date, but I have looked at the data, and it's very different. I actually would like to add one more thing to the paywall. I think that was a really interesting question. I've been asked that question many times. The paywall for us is, it's not a business model that we want to screw with. I think it's still relevant. I think the New York Times is a great example of a business that could be profitable with a paywall. But I think your content has to be so outstanding and so different that users are going to want to pay, X dollars every single month to get the content 25 minutes before everyone else. Because I will say, with torrents out there, it's not that difficult to get content behind paywalls. I mean, I can copy and paste content into my Facebook, and then what? I could pay whatever $20 a month to access content and then paste it into Facebook, and then all my friends have access to it for free. What we did find is users that buy iPads and Android devices and iPhones, they will download a news aggregator. They might download your news application, right? Like they might download the USA Today app and the New York Times app, but they will get one application, whether it's one or many, that are news aggregators. If they get a news aggregator, I can almost guarantee if they like the experience, they're going to spend a little bit more time because they're not siloed into one source. It is a huge opportunity missed for any paywalled content provider to not provide their content to the aggregator at that point, because the bottom line is you make money with eyeballs because that's where all the ads are. And if you can work out a rev share model with many of the best news aggregators, it's a win-win. So if users open your application, you get the eyeballs. If they open the news aggregator, you get the eyeballs. Because what Mark said, I think, is really freaking important. It's not, actually, you alluded to it as well, right? It's not just about the source. If they get the content for free, that's where they're going to go. And I don't think users mind seeing an ad or two as long as they know that the content that's getting surfaced to them is the best kind of content, and it's worth their time to look at an ad. And if the ad doesn't get in the way, there's a huge opportunity for any paywalled organization to work with aggregators on a rev share. Sorry for the long answer.
Yeah, well,
Have you guys tested or learned anything from users, kind of more advanced gestural activities, talking about kind of design and interaction, like four-finger swipes, things like that? Is there anything you've learned or standards that are emerging? I know everybody's kind of Wild West right now, but.
Yeah, that's a great question. We're working on a few big redesigns and new apps at the Post right now. And my big strategy going into it was basically that the button is dead. When there was the rumor that I think it was iPad 2 initially that they were going to remove the home button off of the actual device, which still could maybe happen, I was like, okay, let's try to get ahead of thinking, down the road, it's going to become very much more gesture-driven. Because really right now in a lot of tablet designs is you have to touch it, and it's really like basically button content. It's much more fluid if you can just like gesturally move into it. Advanced gestures get a little more difficult because if they're ingrained into the actual OS, then you can't really use them as much. But we are trying to go away from the traditional like 17 buttons and menus kind of option, and much more of everything you do is gestural.
So for this particular question, I like to say that we want to stand on the shoulders of giants, because the bottom line is we don't have millions and millions of users. We're still a brand new application. So, for us it would be more meaningful if a bigger company stepped in and said, you know what, we're going to change the game a little bit, and we're going to bring in new gestures that hundreds of millions of people can use. And I think starting next week, Facebook's launching their new application for the iPad, and it's all gesture-driven because they bought out a company called Push Pop Press, and they came up with some really interesting interactions. Now that's where I see the opportunity, because you might not have heard of Flood, and you probably, if you use it, you may not use it again, but you will use Facebook. And if you use Facebook on the tablet, you're going to have to use the gestures that apps like Facebook provide. I think the opportunity for applications like ours, where we have millions, but we have a few million users, not hundreds of millions of users, is we can stand on their shoulders and say, all right, these are, if the gestures are good, well, these are good gestures that we can bring into our application, and we can figure out really interesting ways to push our application forward from the button interface to the gesture interface. But there's no question, everything's moving to gestures. Yeah.
Would you say that
Yes.
Yeah, one of the most ripped off things out there.
I think we may have one more question left. Yeah, go ahead.
So it sounds like you're saying tablets are how we're consuming news now. What do your teams say? How are we going to consume news and share information next?
Yeah, go ahead.
If I knew that, I probably wouldn't be sitting here right now. But I would say that the way I kind of think about it is that everything's going to become very consolidated, that there will no longer be small screen, tablet, desktop, whatever. There will be one device. And I think that tablets kind of in the middle right now is kind of the baby bear product. I think that it's going to be something like tablet will be the next consumption. Or it might be some sort of digital kind of print type thing, like Minority Report style. But it's going to be probably the size of this. I think that phones, sure, will probably still be relevant, but I think the desktop, the laptop are probably gonna be
gone. So I'm a big fan of print, actually. I've been designing in digital all my life, and I don't think print is going to go away. I think there's a nostalgic value to print that our generation can appreciate, and at least for the next few decades. I think print is still kind of cool, right? But in terms of we're trying to innovate in digital. So, in digital, an investor that wanted to invest in Flood once told me earlier this year that, hey, Bobby, you know what? The magic number is 1, and you're going to have one screen, and on that one screen, you're going to have that one page, and on that one page, you're going to have all the stuff you need. And I was like, wow, that really is the magic number. And then I came back and I thought about it. I went back home and I thought about it. I really thought about it deeply, and I said, well, holy shit, no, it's not. That's really freaking boring. I don't just want one. I want a few, right? I don't want many, but I want a few. And I think where we are today, the iPhone and the iPad, is a really good example of what the next few years, I don't think it's a 1 or 2 year stopgap. I think it's a half a decade until we see the next big innovation. We're still, this entire tablet age is still really young. It's a year old, and there's only really one player in the space that's doing really well. And maybe the Kindle Fire will do well, but who knows? So the future, I don't like to think 5 years out because I don't know what the heck's happening next year, right? So the future, in my opinion, isn't one screen and isn't just one page on that one screen. It is a couple of screens and maybe televisions in there somewhere, but definitely a tablet. And if someone's smart enough to figure out a folding tablet, which it sounds like maybe Samsung will be, then it could be a tablet and a phone sort of put together in one, and you can morph the size of the screen to fit your needs at that specific time. I think that's really interesting. And I think that's probably where the future of news will go and the future of content consumption. Yeah.
I will take it, actually. So I think the future is tablets still. We have a very skewed view of the world here. I'm looking out and I see lots and lots of iPads and other sorts of tablets. Most of the world isn't like that. Even when you see these big numbers from Apple, most of the world doesn't have an iPad. I mean, if you look at usage of Zeit, a lot of people complain that husband and wives, they share one iPad, and they don't want to be using each other's Zeit, so they're scared to thumbs up and thumbs down to contaminate each other's Zeit. So I think that until we get to a world where tablets are as ubiquitous as computers, I mean, this is the future right here. We're only seeing the beginning of gestures. We're only seeing the beginning of screens. We're only seeing the beginning of some of the design features that we have for this. So, I mean, it's a really exciting spot for, I think, all of us to be in and everybody in this room to be in, because this is what people are going to have. They're not going to have a bunch of magazines being delivered to their door. They're probably not going to be having papers delivered to their door. It's all going to be delivered right here because this fits in your backpack, right? So this is the future.
All right, thank you all.